Hi, and thank you for joining me for another video. And friends, this week's Parsha is Parashat Re'eh. And friends, the Parsha begins with the famous statement, "See, I am setting before you a blessing and a curse. If you obey the commands of the Lord your God that I'm giving you today, you will be blessed. And cursed if you disobey, and turn from the way that I'm commanding you today, and follow other gods which you have not known." And we have to ask the question, friends, how does this apply to us today? And friends, if you're on Facebook, I'm sure you've seen it. Post after post by well-intentioned individuals blindly plastering the images of virtually everything pro-Israeli on the net, whether it's Israelis on the beach or in army services or even in the Olympics, or of the Arab conflict, and sometimes even the statements of Israel's secular, irreligious leaders. And friends, what really makes this odd is not the support of one free society for another, but the support of a secular, a-religious society in the name of religion. And worse, equating anyone who opposes it equivalent to opposing God himself. When this verse is explicitly reminding us that whenever the Jewish people collectively suffer, it's not because of what we call today anti-Semitism or because people hate God, but mainly because the Jews have breached the covenant they have made with the Almighty. And in this pasuk, it also answers on other important questions that Christians typically ask on how this curse is actually dispensed. In other words, the average Christian will tell you that the reason you need the cross is that if one broke any of the commandments in the Torah, they would be cursed for eternity, a curse that could only be reversed through Jesus. However, if you read this pasuk carefully, it states, "I will curse you if you disobey the commands and turn from the way that I command you." In other words, breaking the command alone is not sufficient, but one would also have to turn from the Torah completely also. So, if there are any Christians listening out there, breaking a command will not condemn you to an eternal hell. And this, my friend, is a very irrational idea. And this, my friends, is one of the main reasons you could virtually always count on religious Christians for support for the secular state of Israel. Why? Well, because according to Christianity, Jews didn't begin going off the path today, but have been walking in darkness for the last 2,000 years. So in other words, they don't expect anything more, any type of biblical consistency from these people. However, what they do expect is the returning of their Messiah, that the flourishing of Israel is prophesied to proceed. And if you think I'm way off, my friends, have you ever asked yourself if you believe that the average Christian would support a Christian state that went against all principal tenets of Christianity? Of course they wouldn't. At least they wouldn't support it in the name of Christianity. Which really makes us ask, how could there have been a religious Zionist movement in the first place? I mean, look at the secular state of Israel. And friends, you don't have to be a Torah scholar to see it. It's right here in front of us, reminding us to choose a life of blessing over one of cursing by keeping Torah. And friends, it's the major theme across the whole Tanakh, that if we don't keep the Torah within the land will spew us out. And if you don't keep Torah in the Galut, you will cease to exist as a Jew. This is very elementary. The problem is people don't study Torah anymore, which is a notion that has not only been ignored by the Jewish world today, but worse, the Jewish world has become like the builders of the Tower of Babel, who have fortified themselves to fight against the will of God himself. Chas v'shalom. Why? Because that was the main reason for a state of Israel to be formed in the first place. They said that it was to keep Jews safe. We have to ask the question, my friends, safe from who? According to this text, it is God who is the biggest enemy of the Jews nowadays. And it's also ironic to think, friends, that the country that was founded to keep Jews safe is actually the most dangerous country in the world for Jews to live in nowadays. A country that has twice as many abortions per capita than the US, and around 3 times as many homosexuals within it than the US. And a supposed Jewish state that has the audacity to force a government-sponsored gay parade through the streets of its holiest city, Jerusalem, on a yearly basis, not to mention the dozens of parades in Haifa and in Tel Aviv. People, wake up. Anyways, the Parsha goes on to mention the prophet. It says, if a prophet or one who foretells by dreams appears to you and announces to you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder spoken of takes place, and the prophet says, let us follow other gods, gods you have not known, and let us worship them, you must not listen to the words of that prophet or dreamer. And friends, if you read the Parsha, you also notice that this threat was also brought by God himself to see if we truly love him. It states that the Lord your God is testing asking you to find out whether you love him with all your heart and with all your soul. Teaching us that the main reason that people validate new revelations is not because they stem from Torah, but because of lack of love for God, which usually means for egotistical reasons. And this, friends, is the main reason there is no biblical office that has been as twisted as much as the one of the prophet. And this, my friends, is one way you can tell. I challenge you to confront any Judaic believer, from a Jew to a Mormon, and ask them if they could justify the majority of their beliefs through the Torah alone, or do they need some other text? Because, friends, it's clear and mentioned many times in Torah that all we're required to adhere to are the Hukim and the Mishpatim, the decrees and the judgments. And friends, you'll be surprised that they can't do it. Now, these are just my numbers, but I would assume that around 70% of what Jews believe and practice today, and around 90% of what Christians believe and practice, cannot be sanctioned by the Torah alone, the only book we're allowed to derive doctrine from. And virtually because both of these groups have let their theology be altered or manipulated by what they claim to be later revelations, whether it's Das Torah with the Jews or misinterpreted prophecies by the Christians. And friends, it can't be a coincidence that the pasuk preceding this one is the one that states, Lo tosef alav velo tegram mimenu, that we should not add or take away from these commands. So this also applies to the prophet. So, in other words, then and only then does it mention the office of the prophet. And friends, the reason Hashem did this is because he knew that people would be electing prophets to rewrite Torah throughout the generations. Whether it's through individuals claiming that new books fell from heaven, or even in the case of Christians, building doctrine and misinterpreting ideas from the words of the biblical prophets. My friends, the Torah has a self-destruct safety attached to it that is really the only protection it has of keeping itself from eventually morphing into another belief system completely. Because here we see that it says not to follow other gods. But when it says that, it doesn't really mean that there has to be a physical statue in front of you to be liable. Actually, where it says that Elohim Achirim could be any body of foreknowledge contrary to Torah that we're not supposed to follow. In other words, even in the case of the biblical prophet, their job was solely to bring Israel back to the observance of the Torah and not to have groups building doctrines on their esoteric speech. Because in other words, friends, everything we believe must stem from within the auspices of the Torah. And this also includes the authority that was given to Chazal, to the sages who sat on the Sanhedrin, which is an authority that again came from the Torah itself to help legislate ceremonial and ritualistic laws that even in themselves cannot deviate from Torah. And friends, this notion, if understood and followed carefully, will stop you from ever falling into a cult or a sect that has declared that God has some sort of new revelation for us, which, if you think about it, really dismembers Christian theology as a whole. Why? Because again, they base virtually everything they believe on the esoteric speech of the prophets and not on the commands of the Torah. For example, even if the book of Isaiah specifically said that God, Chas v'Shalom, was made up of 10 parts, we would have to stop and say, where is this alluded to in Torah? And then dismiss it. Again, because of the pasuk in the beginning of this parak, where it says, Lo tosef alav velo tegram mimenu, that we're not allowed to add or take away from the commands in the Torah. And this goes for Jews who also waste their time with gematria or Bible codes, or worse, deriving halacha from midrashim or mystical texts. Torah, my friends, is our basis and everything else is commentary. If you're interested in joining the Jewish people through conversion, I want to welcome you to visit doordea.com and learn more about the belief system. And for more about everything Jewish, please visit bejewish.org. Thank you.